Good morning, Europe, and good evening, good afternoon, Asia. My name is Sebastian Bersick, and it is my real pleasure to welcome you all here at the Jean Monnet Center of Excellence for EU-Asia Connectivity at the Department for International Political Economy of East Asia at Ruhr University in Bochum. Today's Jean Monnet lecture theme is the Asian Green Revolution amidst global uncertainties. Where does the EU stand? And since Russia's invasion of Ukraine on the 24th of February this year, global uncertainties have only increased, as if the climate crisis wasn't enough. The Green Revolution is often referred to as the dawn of scientific and technological advancement and modernity in the agricultural sector in the global south. And in the 1960s, a widening Asian food crisis brought the Green Revolution to the region. Since then, the debate has deepened and broadened. There are numerous technical, financial, political, social, and environmental problems that still need to be solved. Global warming limits and consequences of climate change are becoming increasingly acute. Organizations like the United Nations, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, the European Union, and countries like India and China aim towards low-carbon, sustainable economies and cleaner technologies. There is a regional and global need for green investments and innovations to increase the supply of energy and decrease the cost of low-carbon technology and technologies. The Asian continent accounts for more than half of global greenhouse gas emissions. China now accounts for 27%. The US emits 14%. India and the EU emit 7% each. Yet China has also taken a leading position in green technologies. For instance, more than 70% of the world's solar modules are produced in China. And there is a need to drive down the cost of green technology. The world facing climate change and environmental degradation. The question is, where is the green transformation heading and how do geopolitics play into it? And how do EU-Asia relations contribute to global development and the environment? Today's guest speaker is a perfect fit to discuss and reflect the given situation. His Excellency Erik Solheim is the former Executive Director of the United Nations Economic Program. He was the chair of the Development Assistance Committee of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, and Norway's Minister of the Environment and International Development. And Erik, you are currently in Tamil Nadu in the very south of India. So you are right in Asia and at the center of developments, so to speak. Before I give the floor to Erik Solheim, please be reminded to put your questions, comments into the Q&A function, and that goes to all our participants. Erik, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for this introduction. Can you hear me and can you see me? Is everything okay? Okay, very good. Let me start with what happened in Glasgow last year at the climate conference there, where some European NGOs and some European media started blaming India for climate change. Look, all the figures you put forward are right, but they are not per capita figures. And that's because every human being, whether they're at the Tonga Islands or in Germany or in China, they count for the same. And the per capita emissions of the United States up to this point are 25 times Indian per capita emissions and 8 times Chinese per capita emissions. So no one should blame the developing nations, India or China, and of course even more so Africa, for climate change. Climate change is a problem caused mainly by Europe and North America. And that's also why, of course, developing nations in Sharm el-Sheikh demanded to have compensation for damage. It's completely wrong to blame India or China or indeed Africa or any other developing nation for a problem caused by Europe and North America. But the good news is that China and India are now so much a part of the solution to these problems. And I will take where I sit now as an example. I mean, 2 days ago, I was with the chief minister of the state of Tamil Nadu. Tamil Nadu is the southeastern province of India. It has the same population as Germany. It has the same economy per capita as Ukraine before the war. So it's a very powerful, both from economic and population-wise, entity in the world. And it was all about opportunities. No one really spoke about all the horrors of climate change. Everyone spoke about the enormous opportunities for the state of Tamil Nadu and its people to address climate change. Tamil Nadu can be a really powerhouse of wind energy, of solar energy, of green hydrogen, or hydropower. And added, it can use all the greenery, the beauty of its state to attract tourists for ecotourism, but also to protect the wetlands. I mean, the birds here coming the longest travel of any bird in the world, coming from Siberia down to the southern tip of India. There are huge mangroves. There are about 5 tiger reserves in the state of Tamil Nadu. So this is a very rich part of the world, also from the ecosystem, rainforest, mangrove point of view. And protecting this and going green by renewables is the way forward for Tamil Nadu, very well set out now in the Tamil Nadu climate mission. But this is typical now for the attitude in both China and India, the 2 most important developing nations in the world, and some other developing nations. They don't spend much time demanding something from the West. They are looking into how they can capture the markets, how they can benefit from investing in the new green economy. And let me start with China, because China is ahead of everyone else. Whatever green technology you are looking into in today's world, China is in the lead. There is no exception. As you said, 82% of all solar panels in the world last year were made in China. 70% of all electric batteries in the world were made in China. And by the way, none were made in Europe, none in the United States. The rest were made in South Korea, basically, and in Japan. If you buy a European or American electric car, yes, the car may be designed in Germany or in California, but the battery tend to be made in China, and the battery is half the value of the car. I can go on and go on. China was 60% of all hydropower in the world last year, 60% of all offshore wind, was 60% of all solar power in the world. 98% of all the electric buses are running on Chinese roads. And while we have some beautiful high-speed rail in Europe, in Germany, France, Spain, and other places, 70% of all high-speed rail in the world is running on Chinese tracks. So whatever technology you are looking into, China is now well ahead of everyone else, including well ahead of us in Europe. We tend not to register it in Europe because we have this very old picture of China as a horribly polluted place, which was true. It was true 15 years ago, but it isn't true any longer because China has fought a war against pollution with an intensity and determination more than anyone else. They have achieved the same reduction in pollution in about 1 decade as we did in 3 or 4 decades in Europe, or for that matter in the United States. What even fewer in Europe have understood is that China is not just ahead on environment technologies. China is now also largely ahead on environment practices. China is without any competition the biggest tree planter in the world. That's not my words, it's the words of NASA, the American Space Agency, who just said that the number one reason why the surface of the world of the Earth is going greener is tree planting in China. And President Xi Jinping of China has promised that China will plant an area the size of Belgium every year from now to 2030. Okay, Belgium is not the biggest state in the world, but it's not completely insignificant either. So it's a massive tree planting effort in China, far ahead of any other nation. And I think since the COVID, President Xi Jinping of China visited 3 or 4 national parks in China, on all occasions setting out the message to the Chinese people that they need to create a beautiful China and to take care of the environment. I would love to see all European leaders visit national parks that often with the same message to us in Europe. And you also see now snow leopards coming back in Western China and in Central Asia. Snow leopards are taken now off from their list of most threatened species, which is good. And same has happened to giant pandas. The Giant Panda National Park in Sichuan has been very successful. It's a high-tech operation, and the number of giant pandas is increasing. China has launched a ban on fishing in the Yangtze River and in the upper part of the Yellow River. I'm Norwegian, and we have the same experience in Norway. And we had huge trouble with cod and herring in the past in Norway. Then in cooperation with the European Union and with Russia and Iceland, we had a ban on fishing for a short period of time, and fish came back in abundance. And now both the herring and cod fisheries are very, very rich, and fishermen make good money from the fisheries. Exactly the same will happen in the Yangtze and Yellow River. A fishing ban will be short-term pain, but long-term gain. So what we haven't really observed yet in Europe is that China is now well ahead, both on environment practices and environment technologies. Even less attention there is to the fact that India is following suit. I've been a frequent visitor to India over the last decades, and the debate in India in the past was always, do we want to develop, or do we want to take care of Mother Earth? And surprise, surprise, 95% of all Indians prefer to develop. Still, there are a lot of poor people in India, and they wanted to bring everyone out of poverty, everyone into the middle class. Then came Prime Minister Modi with a completely new narrative. India can develop and go green at the same time. There is no choice between ecology and economy. And you see now India launching new massive solar parks or roof-scale solar parks by the day. I'm following the renewable news from India. There's hardly a day where it's not a new development somewhere in this huge nation, India going in solar. And I think we can be absolutely certain that within the next few years, India will be the second biggest solar nation in the world, next to China. Adding to that, Prime Minister Modi launched the green hydrogen mission for India. Immediately, the big bosses, the big captains of Indian industries, Adani, which was just recognized as the second richest person in the world, Ambani, which is also among the 10 richest person on the planet, they immediately put forward massive plans for green hydrogen, solar energy, and wind energy in India, so that India will be a massive powerhouse for green industries. And you can also look to other practices. India is also doing a lot of tree planting. The number of tigers in India have been doubled over the last decade or so. Same as happened, by the way, in Nepal, which is a very good development. And tiger is a very, very difficult animal to protect because it attacks and kills humans to eat us. We have huge difficulties back home in Norway to protect our wolves, but never ever in Norwegian or Swedish history a wolf attacked humans to kill us. It simply hasn't happened in recorded history, where tigers are killing a number of Indians every year. Still, India has been able to increase the tiger population. If we move on to Indonesia, which of course is the third biggest Asian nation, they had a huge success last year. For the first time in the modern history of Indonesia, there was no deforestation. Why? because of good policies of the Indonesian government, of the Jokowi government, but also because the big industries in Indonesia have realized that they can make all the profits, make all the jobs, gain momentum by exercising restraint. So as an example, RGE, that's the biggest paper and pulp company in the world and one of the biggest palm oil producers in the world, they have zero deforestation in the value chain. They promise to do it and they do it. And they're even conserving a huge rainforest in the island of Sumatra. And that rainforest tend to be better protected than those protected by the government, simply because RG has all the fire brigades, all the helicopters, all what is needed to protect the rainforest. So if you sum up this, you see the same attitude in China and India and Indonesia, and that is not to focus the conversation on all the problems of climate change. Those are real and real way, but to focus on the opportunities. And look, of course, these nations didn't have, for instance, a traditional car industry. There is no Chinese or Indian brand, anything comparable to Citroën in France or Volkswagen in Germany or General Motors in the United States. So they are taking the view that they will leapfrog into the future, leapfrog into the electric mobility. And China is now 50% of the market for electric cars, and new brands are coming up by the day. BYD, the biggest electric car maker in China, is now just on the moment to pass Tesla as the biggest producer of electric cars in the world. Here in India, there is a company called Ola, that's the Uber of India. They set up a beautiful factory here in the state of Tamil Nadu in the south. 2,000 young Tamil women are making electric scooters. Soon they will make electric batteries and electric cars. And the slogan of Ola, I think, is very telling. It says, Tesla for the West, Ola for the rest. Meaning that they think Ola can produce electric cars cheaper, better than we can do in the West. A study by some of the consultant companies about the world economy in 2050 was, I think, very illustrative for us. China is by far the biggest economy according to the predictions in 2050. India and the United States will share the second position, which of course means that the United States is much richer per capita, but the volume of the economy will be shared at the second position. And the fourth biggest economy, yes, it's Indonesia. No European nation except Germany will be among the 10th biggest alone, because the European Union as an entity will still be a massive economic force, but separated, the different European economies will be very limited. So this is my first message, to prepare for the ASEAN century and try to observe in a more objective way how much is happening there. And we have to admit that we Europeans need to get up very early in the morning if we want to compete with China and India in the green transformation. This is, of course, linked to, and that's my second observation, it's very much linked to the fourth industrial revolution. Fourth industrial revolution is the combined forces of biotech, information technology, and the energy revolution. Very good news was that the International Energy Agency last week came up with a report which said that the crisis in Ukraine, horrible as it is for the people of Ukraine, will have a very good side effect, and that is to supercharge the electric revolution of the world. International Energy Agency uplifted the predictions for the next 5 years by 30%. They said that by these 5 years, renewables will pass coal as the main source of energy in the world, and we see this energy supercharged by the war in Ukraine. That is because in Europe, we want to be independent of Russian oil and gas and Russian fossil fuels. But all those nations who are not so much concerned with the war in Ukraine because they think that's a European affair, that's the India, the Brazil, the China, the Saudi Arabia, all these nations, Turkey, they want to be independent on the volatility of the carbon, of the oil and gas prices. If you're sitting here in India, every rupee you spend on oil and gas is on import. All oil and gas is imported into India. Every rupee spent is a rupee you send to some other nation. If India can produce its own solar, own wind, and reduce the import of oil and gas, yes, it's very good for the environment. It's very good for jobs in India, and it saves money for India, which it can use for education, health, and other purposes. So it's a no-brainer for India, as it is for China and from everyone else, to make themselves less independent on imported oil and gas. So we will see the war in Ukraine supercharge it, and it's of course linked to all the new technological innovations coming in the energy sector. Linked to this is all the innovations in the IT industry. These are very much linked because a lot of the progress in IT can also be used to supercharge the renewable industries. We can make, say, solar farms a lot more effective by using IT. We can make our grids a lot more effective by using information technologies. So there are so many opportunities to merge the energy and the information technology revolution. Also here, there is a reason for Europe to be a little bit observant, because particularly artificial intelligence tend not to be totally dominated by the United States and by China. There is very little European fingerprint on that. Just a couple of figures. I mean, China is now 80% of all 5G stations in the world. Huawei tend to be in the forefront on that. China is 80% of all drones in the world. One company, DJI, in the city of Shenzhen, is alone about for 80% of the drones in the world. And the progress scientifically and industrially in artificial intelligence, which will be such a dominating technology for the future, tend to be driven by China and the US, and we need to step up. For Europe, the only way forward is a mixture of cooperation and competition. Of course, it's completely rational to compete with China and with India, because we need jobs at home. If you are Chancellor Scholz of Germany, you have your voters in Bavaria or in North Rhine-Westphalia. If you are President Macron of France, you have your voters in Toulouse or in Lille. Your voters are not in China or in India. So the European leaders need to work to get the industries in Europe up to a shape where they can compete. At the same time, we need to cooperate with China and with India, because there is so much we can do together to fight environment destruction and climate change. China and India both have the advantage of huge domestic markets. The market in both China and India is now 1.4 billion people, and of course in both places there is one market. That tells us how important it is for Europe to have one market in Europe, and of course for Africa to move also into one market. You can produce in Guangdong in southern China, and you can sell it to Inner Mongolia in north of China. You can produce in Gujarat in western India, and you can sell it into Kerala in the south. And this creates enormous markets which drive down the price, and because scale is the most important factor for the price. So this mixture of competition and cooperation is what Europe needs to move into. Finally, there are some forces, particularly in the United States, who are looking into some sort of decoupling of the world. That's a very dangerous proposition. It will drastically reduce innovation. It will drastically reduce poverty alleviation in the world. It will reduce trade and make us all much poorer than we could have been. So we need to stand up and fight that. And of course, the good news is that no other nation in the world wants this. Sometimes there is some echo of this debate from the United States and Europe, but largely Europe do not want to choose. And of course, no one in Latin America, no one in Africa or the rest of Asia want to choose. Every nation in the world want to cooperate with China and with the United States at the same time, and of course also with India and others. When Mr. Bolton, the National Security Advisor of the United States or President Trump, he told Africa, you need to choose. Either you are with China or you are with the United States. Not one leader in Africa, not one raised his or her hand to say, I agree with you, Secretary of National Security Advisor. They all said, we disagree, we don't want to choose. We want investment from both the United States and China. I want people-to-people's contact, political contact, culture contact, everything with both the United States and China. And that should be the position of Europe also, to resist the idea from Washington that we should decouple the world and go into a new Cold War, but to be able to work very closely with both the two major powers of the world. And of course, for Europe to be strong, we need to stick together, because if we look to every individual nation in Europe, we are far too weak to be really able to stand up if there should be some sort of conflict or competition with either China or the United States. And the market is also far too small to really be able to compete. So if we want to compete or we want to cooperate, we need to stick together in Europe. And the only way to do that, of course, is to strengthen the European Union. So I think the message of today is very much in the spirit of Jean Monnet, who was such a strong advocate of United Europe, and which has given his name to these lectures. And it will be in his spirit to take forward this. Yes, we want to work together with China, work together with India, we want to work together with the United States, but we want to do it on basis of European strength, and that we can only get if we come together. I'll be happy in the discussions to come more into the geopolitics, how we in Europe can work with China and India and others on the basis of focusing on unity and respect. But I stop here and leave it over to you to take the discussion forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Erik, for your comprehensive and a very clear discussion of the many variables that are out there. That certainly is related to economic, but also political and security factors, which you've brought together here. And you've also painted a very outreaching picture, so to speak, that is to focus on the opportunities that are there, that the future offers and that current challenges do offer, and not focus too much on the obvious downfalls that political developments and economic developments also bring. Yet at the same time, I suppose we are all well aware that the challenges are massive, and it's not only, for instance, it's not only governments, but it's also the private sector, it's non-state actors, it's civil society that need to come together here and play a role. When we refer to China, for instance, and the aim to decarbonize by 2060, the European Union Chamber of Commerce in China has pointed out and that in order to reduce the carbon footprint, all tools at disposal need to be leveraged, and in order to meet these very ambitious goals. And there is certainly also the link between climate security on the one hand and energy security on the other hand, and the question, well, how these two can be managed. And here in Europe, certainly we do have that discussion. That is even linked to the role of nuclear power plants. So So I was I'm actually wondering, do you see that the Europeans and it's the Green Deal, that this is up to the challenges? I mean, you pointed out that it's very important that the European Union member states, that they are united, that they stand united. You pointed out how Asian countries are going to become the major drivers of and the leading drivers of the world economy very soon. How can Europe actually compete then? As you said, it needs to, but how can it?
The obvious answer, really the no-brainer answer to the energy security issue, is to develop as fast as überhaupt possible the renewables. Because the sun is European, the wind is blowing in Europe, the rivers are European, and we can make hydropower in the rivers, and we can use the rivers as a battery for solar and wind, and we can make green hydrogen to power all of this. And you have seen some European nations, Denmark as an example, to move very, very fast and very determined on this. And there's a lot of development in Germany and other nations in Europe also. And that's energy security. You are getting the energy from your own sun and your own wind. Then you're not depending on someone else. And the good news is that the crisis in Ukraine will supercharge this. But of course, it also needs determined action from business and from government. And I tend to believe that business is now ahead of governments in most of the world. The European Commission and European Union is now playing a very important role in Europe. I see it in my own nation, Norway. We are far behind the European Union now. And we have some strong areas like, say, electric cars in Norway, but overall, Brussels are giving us a green direction, not the other way around. And some companies are really taking the lead. Let me just mention one. It's a Danish company called Ørsted. It was 100% oil company called Dong 10 years ago. Now it's 100% renewable. It's one of the biggest wind makers in the world. How did that happen? Well, the leadership in the company decided we want to change. And then they convinced the shareholders, the staff, the customers that change was necessary. And they did drive through the change. And now it's a very profitable, well-run company, making a lot more money and a lot more jobs in the green sector than they did in the past in the oil sector. But I made a podcast with Matt Snipper, the CEO of the company once, and he told me it's all about making the decision. If you don't make the decision to go green, it will never happen. You must make the decision, and then you will bring people on board.
Yes, these decisions are obviously also influenced by the broader political climate, and here the question of dependencies. That is to say, you described that China is leading the green revolution in the sense that its technologies are the new technologies are it's heading those developments. In how far does this pose a risk for Europe? I mean, in the area of, for instance, of solar panels, the European industries have been outcompeted, and as we know, this puts European industries into huge troubles, to say the least. So how to deal with these dependencies? Isn't there a security risk that Europe also needs to counter somehow? Isn't cooperation and competition that's not all that we need in order to describe what we actually observe? And that brings me to this systemic rivalry rivalry that is now also part of the European Union's China policy. Where do you stand when it comes to this third element, that is systemic rivalry?
I'm not in love of that term for sure. I think we should aim at a world where we show more respect to each other and where we should focus more on what unites us. Because at the end of the day, most core issues for the world unites us. I mean, that's to bring everyone out of poverty, to make sure that there's a safe life for the middle class, to really face substantial challenges like environment destruction or climate change and wars or conflicts. All this unites us and we need to work together. There is an economic competition. There's an economic competition within Europe, between Europe and the outside world, between companies. And that competition has proven through capitalism to be a major force for innovation and for better products and technological change. So we need that competition, but we should not choose China or India or the United States or any other nation as a rival. We should see them as competitors. I mean, the next president of the United States can very well be Donald Trump or some other Trumpite. They will not share all values with Europe, I can tell you. Still, the United States should not be seen as a rival, but should be seen as a nation where we compete and cooperate with.
Yeah, that is certainly the case, that we have this complex reality that consists of those different elements, and we do have a couple of questions from our audience related to this reality, and one is related to the tree planting project that takes place in China. Are these impressive achievements by China also maintained, is the question. The number of trees planted is not the only factor in determining the offset of carbon released into the atmosphere. Are the trees allowed to age? Are they monocultures? Are they climate change resistant, and to what degree? So is this comprehensively sustainable?
These are a very good questions from a person with good knowledge of the topic, because there is a substantial failure rate when you plant trees, and not all trees will grow up. And of course, if you make monocultures in areas where you have a very varied fauna and flora, that will be a failure. But yes, the answer is yes. These are huge success stories in China. As an example, in Saihanba, that's just north of Beijing, I mean 6-7 hours by car north of Beijing, they have greened the area which was very dry and extremely cold. It's much colder than Norway, for instance, and it's very successful. Yes, in that area it tends to be the same type of trees planted, but that's exactly as in Norway or Finland. We don't have a huge variety of trees in Norway and Finland because we're so far north. Go to more tropical areas, of course, it's an enormous variety of trees. And that's so China, you can take for granted that China attacked these problems with exactly the same scientific way as we will do in Europe. In the northern areas, there will be a limited variety, but in the tropical will be a huge variety. And just to end up with another fantastic success story, the Kobuchi Desert, that's in the Chinese province of Inner Mongolia. They started in the 1980s to see this as an economic opportunity. There was a person called Wang Wenbiao, a young person at the time, now it's 70, but he started to do this, making products in the desert which could make medical plants, putting solar panels out in the desert, moving into ecotourism, and massive tree planting and greening. And now they also do it with drones in a very high-tech way. And it's probably the most successful greening of a desert anywhere in the world. Just when President Xi went to Saudi Arabia this week, that was part of the agreement to share the experience from Kobuchi to Saudi Arabia so that they can have some of the same successes in greening of the deserts in Saudi Arabia as they had in China.
Yeah, well, that goes to the, or that did go to the question by a student of RUP, Mr. Sofinovsky, and we do have another question, and that is related to China and the question of responsibilities when it comes to global greenhouse gas emissions. From what you have said, it seems as if you conclude that developing countries bear no responsibility for climate harm, although China has been the world's emissions leader for several years, of course, not per capita. However, doesn't this alone justify normative obligations? That is one question.
Mm-hmm. It's of course wrong to say that they have no responsibility, but the West cannot run around finger pointing and blaming. That has no value. I mean, if you come, I mean, I'm sitting here in India. Please consider how Indians will think if a Westerner comes here and blame India for climate change, knowing that the American emissions are 25 times higher than Indian per capita. My nation, Norway, the per capita emissions are 15 times the emissions of India. So for Westerners to blame China or India will bring us absolutely nowhere. But the good news is, of course, that President Xi of China, Prime Minister Modi of India, and a huge amount of other leaders, they take the responsibility, but they're not doing it for us. They're doing it because they know that climate change is a major threat to China and to India, and they do it because they believe that China and India can capture the markets and have economic benefits from going green. Here in the state of Tamil Nadu, where I'm now, the chief of the state has the name of Mr. Stalin, which is not a good name in Europe. But Mr. Stalin and Mr. Modi, the prime minister, they are not in agreement on most issues, but on this, they're in full agreement. Climate change is a threat to India, but responding to it is an enormous opportunity for India to capture jobs, to create growth, to bring every Indian out of poverty, and to make India a much better place. So let's work with China and India on that basis, that they know best what they should do in their nations, and they are moving very fast, and we may even have something to learn. And that's what I sometimes think is lagging in Europe. We are very good at preaching, but sometimes not so good at looking into, can we learn something from China or from India, or for that matter, from Latin America, Africa?
Yeah, well, some in Europe do have learned the hard way that focusing on cooperation and not on on survival is something that can haunt you. And here I'm thinking of for instance, of relations with Russia. Over the course of the last 30 years since the end of bipolarity. So that certainly explains why also in the next question there is this risk dimension of what we are discussing is looming large, and the opportunities, as you are emphasizing them, are again not in the forefront. Having said that, the question runs as follows. To what extent is India or the EU autonomous of Chinese-made green technology for its energy transition? What are the geopolitical consequences of this new constellation of dependencies?
First of all, this is a very good and important question. I mean, here in India, there is a strong determination to make the green products Indian. For obvious reasons, and there's 1 million young people joining the labor market in India every month. All of them want a job. And India will get more jobs if they can produce the windmills or the solar panels here in India, or the electric cars here in India, than they can get by importing this from China. But this needs to be a mixture. Because if you don't import but just produce yourself, you will slow down your own development. There's a very, very strong argument to be made that the United States has drastically slowed down its own solar development because it put restrictions to import of solar panels from China, because they can produce them at the same price in the United States. And when they become a lot more expensive, the solar industry is less competitive. So there must be a mixture of import and self-production. But to the larger argument, I see no parallels between China and Russia. I know that many Europeans tend to believe that there are some parallels between them. I see no parallels between them. China has not been into any war for the last 40 years. China is the one global nation that uses veto power in the UN Security Power the least. And China has taken a low profile in every conflict, trying to be a force for peace. While Russia in Syria, in Ukraine, and a number of other places have been a very aggressive nation. So there is no parallel between the peaceful attitude of China and the aggressive turnaround of global order by Russia. By and large, China has benefited so much from the global order, which was made by the United States. I mean, the global order for the last 70 years is made by the United States. It was started by Franklin D. Roosevelt and has been underpinned by the United States since. And China did rise up in that global order, and it's been in their interest. So China has not basically challenged that order, but been a force for peace. Adding to all this, of course, before the war in Ukraine, the Russian economy was at the level of Italy. Now it's probably at the level of Spain, while of course China is in competition with the United States, depending on how you track it, of being the biggest economy in the world. There is no, I mean, if you go to a supermarket in Norway, I can find no Russian trademark. You may get some Russian vodka in our wine shops, and you may get Russian oil, but Russia has no economic power outside the oil and gas sector. So it's two completely separate nations, China and Russia. And of course, Chinese ideology has nothing to do with Russian. It's deeply anchored in Confucianism, 2,500 years old in China. Go to China, no one will tell you about Marx or Lenin. You can go around for 10 years and you will never hear a word about Marx or Lenin. But of course, Confucius, I mean, the great emperors of the Tang or Ming Dynasty or Han Dynasty, they will be all over the place. So it's a Chinese nationalism, and it's very different from Russia.
Mm-hmm. Well, this certainly is a how to put it, to some people that will sound as a very benign interpretation of what can also be observed. Obviously, it also depends on whom you ask. I'm sure that people in Taiwan, for instance, do react with some hesitance to an optimistic interpretation of China's, that is the People's Republic of China's intentions. And obviously also a country like Lithuania has experienced a form of economic coercion that is far from adequate, to say the least, or appropriate. So it takes no wonder that in Europe and also for the European Union, and also a country like, especially here in Germany at the time, currently, that China policies are being revisited and in a way rewritten in view of increasing assertive Chinese behavior by Xi Jinping's China, and the uncertainties that come with it. That is in the case of Germany, for instance, there is a new China strategy is currently drafted, which will be far more explicit when it comes to pointing out to risks attached to dependencies stemming from the economic than that used to be the case over the course of the last decades. There is a further very specific question, and that is, how do you interpret the fact that the PRC is not a member of the Indian and French-launched International Solar Alliance? Is that a question you feel comfortable with? Otherwise, we continue to. I'll choose the next one.
I think they should join. I was there at the launch of the International Solar Alliance with President Macron and Prime Minister Monnet, and I think China should join it.
Okay, so that's a clear message. Then there is a further question, and that is related to the carbon border mechanism, and it will which will begin to operate from October 2023. And the question in how far you think that this will actually allow China and also the European Union to increase its cooperation?
I have to admit that I'm no real expert on these border or trade arrangements. I hesitate a little bit to address them. Of course, I mean, look, there are legitimate European concerns in the past. I mean, feeling that China has stolen patents. That's, by the way, exactly what we also did at some point in our development. I mean, the Norwegians stole patents from Germany and the UK and started using them in Norway to develop. So, but at the time when China was much poorer than Europe and North America, they were stealing patents, or at least developing on the basis of patents made by others. That need to stop now, because now China is at the level with some of many European nations. So of course China cannot do that any longer, and China is now also itself soon to be the biggest patent nation in the world. So they have a self-interest in protecting that system. So we will see a change here. So that's one background for this, and the other is of course that China will come up also at the cost of labor, which is very similar to Europe. So they won't have a huge benefit from lower labor cost. Environment protection is as strong in China as in Europe by and large. So we will be able to compete on a more equal footing than we were in the past, where yes, Chinese industries were subsidized. Yes, they probably stole patents, and for sure the labor was much cheaper in China than in Europe. But the future will be competition at a much more equal level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, if you are an industrial worker in China, you have 10% economic, 10% more every year since 2000. that matters a lot. So Chinese workers are not underpaid compared to European. They may still be a little bit lower, but not massively lower than in Europe.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that reply, for that answer. Certainly, the carbon border adjustment mechanism. I mean, this is extremely technical, and yet it's an example of how intense cooperation between the EU and China when it comes to climate change already is. And obviously. The government links the cooperation between the governments. That is also something that is related to the EU's climate partnerships, and here India also sticks out as a partner. Do you see where do you see, since you're currently in India, where do you see India-EU relations going compared to EU-China relations? There is a connectivity partnership, for instance, between the EU and India as well. This is related to the question of values. I mean, here we speak of democracies cooperating. That cannot be said when it comes to the People's Republic of China. Do you think that this normative aspect will it be how important will it be in the future when it comes to the EU's relations with Asia and fighting the climate crisis?
I foresee a relatively similar development over time in the EU-India relationship as in the India-China relationship, because I think India is moving in a much more nationalistic direction and with a new narrative of India. This narrative was, of course, mainly set by Prime Minister Modi and his BJP party, and Indian People's Party. But look, that party has been enormously successful. It's probably BJP is probably the most successful party in the world. It's by far the most impressive social media operation of any party. I mean, no party in Europe or the United States is even close to the social media operation of BJP. They have been able to get money out to the poor people in India as no one else in the past. I mean, the International Monetary Fund just said that India is now on the verge of abolishing extreme poverty. That does not mean that it's not a lot of poverty in India, but the extreme version where you don't have anything to eat and not able to send your children to school, that will be wiped out in India, thanks to good policies by Modi. But in the context of Europe, he's coming with a new vision for India that's rooted in Hinduism. It may create problems between Hindus and Muslims in India, but it's rewriting the entire Indian history in a much more nationalistic way. There's no love for colonialism here, I can tell you. There's not one statue of Winston Churchill anywhere in India. And this new story about what it means to be Indian will be very different from Europe because it's rooted in Hinduism. The good news is exactly the same with India as in China. India has no ambition, they have no missionary thought. They are proud Hindus, but they don't think we Europeans should be Hindus. They have no idea of that. That's exactly the same with China. There's a vast support for the Chinese system in China, but no one in China believes that Europe can adopt the Confucian system, which has existed 2,500 years in China. Prime Minister Modi, there was just an international poll showing that Prime Minister Modi is by far the most popular politician in his own nation anywhere in the world, but that is to make Hinduism the dominant ideology in India, not to export it. And we Europeans and Americans have a tendency to try to export our system, to believe that all Indians should be like us. I mean, in the past, my grandmother thought all Indians would be happy if they became Christians, for sure. We are a little bit less on that, but still the Europeans tend to believe the Chinese political system should be ours and India should be like us. But I tell you, India and China will develop their own ways in the future, and that we can, these are ways we can easily coexist with and cooperate with.
Well, Erik, you did a tremendous job over the course of the last hour. And that is you pointed out your how you perceive current not only the environmental developments on a global scale, but also you link this to the development questions and security questions, and your focus is very much on the opportunities, and certainly that is something that whenever we Europeans, or let's say myself, let's speak of myself, whenever I visit Asian countries, it is something that that certainly is just singularity. That is the sense of opportunity taking and going out for whatever allows to develop further, and that certainly is a kind of spirit and a kind of growth mindset that very much is needed in order to compete and to succeed. And also to make the world a better place. And I understand that also from your talk and from your work and your writings, that this is something that is driving you, that is to make the world a better place. And actually, as you call it, to save Mother Earth, isn't it? And so I think here it is where all our interests meet. That, of course, is a very concrete and at the same time very abstract objective. and yet it's there and necessary to achieve. So thank you very much for your talk, for your time, and thank you to our audience, to all participants who joined us here at this Jean Monnet lecture. Also, thank you very much to the tech team that is working behind the laptops. And I'm looking forward to meeting all of you, hopefully, again next year. That is after, Christmas break. And have a happy new year then as well. Huh? It's already time to say that. Thanks again, Erik. And bye-bye to everybody.